Hello and welcome back to my Fire Red Nuzlocke. Most folks just call me Orange Joe, and in the last episode I started talking about Metallica. We're going to keep talking about Metallica. But also a lot of other stuff, and we have a lot of progress to be made. So give me one moment, because I'm going to hydrate, and I should have done this before starting, but I'm an idiot. So I didn't. No, I'm dying. Alright, so we're gonna jump into it. So I mentioned that Sweet Amber is what we named the Pokemon that came out of our Amber fossil, and that name comes from a Metallica album, and it's, again, they're not. Oh, that's fine actually. It's not their. It's one of their least popular albums. So it's off of their Saint Anger album, which I get why people hate it. I really do. I don't want to come off as like as snobbish or anything, because I get it. With that album especially, it's calling it an acquired taste is a bit rich. But, are we good at a melodic? Excuse me. Get me out of here, dude. Why didn't a repel that? Though we are repelled, right? I'm pretty sure. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe that's why. But so I truly love Metallica. It's a band that, like, they will always have a place in my heart just because of the connection I have with my dad with that band. Like, they in concert with each other, like, it meant so much to me as a kid, plus it meant so much to me because of my dad, that that band will always mean something to me, no matter what. And actually, when I was, I wouldn't say 16, but around 15 or so, I was like, when I turn 18, I'm getting a Metallica tattoo. But as time's gone on, I'm glad I didn't. And obviously I didn't, but I'm glad I didn't, because I've gone through stages with Metallica where it's kind of fallen off the radar for me just because I forgot about them, more or less. And I don't mean that in a rude way. It's just like, as time goes on, life comes at you fast. You get busy, and suddenly, you know, a whole year's gone by and you haven't thought of what you used to consider your favorite bands. You know, it's just, it all becomes a big blur, and okay, and you know, before you know it, it's just time's slipping through your fingers. So to that end, you know, I don't think I would ever want to tattoo a band that I wasn't in on my flesh. You know, I don't want to permanently be marked as like a fan of any one band, because knowing me, like, that opinion's gonna change, or, you know, I'll forget about a band or whatever. Because, like, right now, my favorite bands are pretty different. It's Tupperware Remix Party out of good old Canada, and Necrogoblicon. Those are my two favorite bands by kind of leaps and bounds right now. I adore those bands. And, you know, to that end, I don't think I would ever tattoo either band's, like, anything on myself, like on my person. Just not because, like, I don't like them enough, because I kind of do. Like, if I were a tattoo guy to begin with, I would totally get a tattoo of both of those bands just because I could. This is not where I want to be. Alright! But it's something where it's just like, I don't trust that I'll remember those bands for long enough, and that they'll be stuck in my head. Now, again, if I ever end up doing music stuff, which I intend to and want to, believe me, I got that fire burning in my gut, because I really do love music, and, like, there's definitely something to be said about, you know, how much I will have a lot of these things kicking around in my head on some days that I can't seem to get rid of it. So maybe in the future look out for me doing musical stuff, because I'll promote it on the channel for sure if I do. I don't expect you guys to like it, but I do intend to do it. But regardless of that, so Metallica, right? So their Saint Anger album came at a very tumultuous time for the band, and this is going to be a bit of a history lesson if you don't know Metallica. Strap yourselves in. It's neat, I think, to learn about band history, especially when it's so so crazy as Metallica. Because Metallica was like the biggest band in the world for a little while, and they had everything going for them, and they still managed to screw several parts of it up. So their original, I shouldn't say original, but the bassist people know the best from the band, from the original lineup, is Cliff Burton. And Cliff Burton was a phenomenal musician, like unbelievable, borderline unparalleled with how good he was at what he did, more or less. Like, I don't mean that to sound like stuffy, up your own butt kind of stuff, like where it's like, he was one of the best because he's in one of my favorite bands. But like, no, he genuinely like revolutionized how people play bass. Like 100%, he was instrumental, but genuinely instrumental in changing how people perceive bass guitars. He played his bass like a lead instrument. He made it feel important. He put so much emphasis on his learning and applied like lead guitar ideology to his bass. So like, this is going to be a little bit more musical savvy for those of you who know music, but a common thing to do with bass playing specifically is to always start whatever you're playing on the root note of what you're doing, because it keeps that rhythm going. You know, the root note of your progression or whatever you're playing at that time is usually where the bass is going to start, because it needs to keep that rhythm. It needs to keep it flowing, right? But what Cliff would do when he was playing a bass solo, or when he was trying to add pizzazz, is he would not start on the root note, but instead would start on a neighboring note, like the note following or preceding the root note in the progression, so that way it would have more motion to it. And it's really apparent that he does this in songs like the solo to Orion, or several backing tracks, other songs, where he's playing like a heavy solo into a part. And when he's doing this, it's something that like wasn't really done before. And even going beyond that, in their Kill 'Em All album, he had a tone that was so different for bassists at the time, because he was using like Lemmy, actually, he was using Lemmy from Motorhead. He's using a Rickenbacker, and that bass has such a unique sense to it, right? And even moving beyond the tonality of the actual instrument, he was playing it in such a way that was unique for the time. And because Metallica's initial album was close to a thrash album, honestly, it was pretty... Grout on you say, huh? No switchies. It was pretty intense. So you have this bassist who's playing at a thrash speed with sentiments of a lead guitarist. So he's making this instrument feel so important in a band dynamic, especially compared to how other people were doing it, where they were just like, yeah, I'm a backing instrument. And he was like, nah, screw that noise, man. I am an instrument in this band, and you will pay attention to me. So that's why on that album is Anesthesia Pulling Teeth, which that song is a bass solo like people hadn't really heard before. It's on such a level that it's incredible. It just sounds like a guitar solo, right? But it simply isn't. It's a bass solo that's just played as though it is a guitar solo. It's played with such speed and importance placed behind it, with an entire song built around this instrumental bass solo. And it's so good. And then unfortunately, Cliff Burton ended up passing in 19... I'm sorry to tell you, I don't remember. I believe it was 87. Because, you know, they're Bone Club. Here's the thing. Cliff Burton was president for 3 of Metallica's albums, and he was he had written several portions for their 4th album before passing tragically in an accident. But I don't remember how much he was into it, because their next album came out in 1988. So I don't remember for sure when he passed. I believe it was 87, however. So he got replaced by a fellow named Jason Newsted, also a very good bassist, honestly, and he was with Metallica for a long time. But when he got... Okay, so we do have to fight Blaine before we go to the island. So quickly talking about the game, there's always the option of skipping every single fight and just going to Blaine, but we're not going to do that. We're not nuts. We want the experience. So we're going to fight every fight instead, because we are nuts. So anyway, in 88, Jason Newsted he ends up getting into the band, and kidding me, dude? Sucks. We don't have any rock type moves. It's gotta be, I guess, Torchy. I really don't have any good answers for his Zapdos right now. So in 88, Newsted gets added to the band. He works on the And Justice for All album. And because the band members, specifically Lars Ulrich, is kind of a jerk, but several members are jerks, they end up mixing the album so that the bass is not audible throughout almost the entire thing. It's almost as quiet as can be. Like, there's an interview with the producer on that album, I do not remember his name, I'm sorry, who was like appalled at the tone that Lars Ulrich, the drummer, was going for. Because Lars literally had a picture, like a genuine printed out photograph of an EQ setting that he wanted his drums to sound like. And when the mix was made to, right, Torchy, I guess he got it, to sound that way, the way this producer described it was, he basically thought that Lars was kidding. He thought it sounded so bad, and he basically shoved everyone out of the room except for James Hetfield, and was like, I'm going to mix this the way I hear it, the way I think this album should sound. I'm going to put it all together and make it sound as though I'm the creative lead on this band. And he's like, I know I'm not, but I'm going to make this sound as great as I can as a producer. And when Lars got back in the room, he was furious and demanded it all be changed back, and was like, you ruined my tone and all this stuff. And he just like looked at him and was like, you were serious about that? I thought you were kidding. I wanted to do my job because it's, you know, I'm the producer. I want to make it sound good, not sound how you think good is. But regardless of that, they ended up tuning the mix so that the bass guitar was borderline inaudible on this entire album. And then going a step beyond that, like literally he was like, tune it so that it's so far below the band that you can barely hear it, and then tune it down a little bit more. And so this whole album has like no bass to it, despite the album like being a fantastic album. Genuinely, I adore this album. It's very good. I forgot that I shouldn't use you against Anita Queen. But it doesn't have any bass. And there's actually a funny a fan creation called And Justice for Jason, or And Justice for Newsted. And that version of the album is a fan redub of bass over the album, mixed into it so that it sounds as though it were a studio release with the bass just being added onto it. And a lot of people have joked that album is the create your own bass track album, where you just jam along to it because there's no bass anyway. um, but it's a shame that they did that to him, because it was hazing. They were like, oh, Jason's not, he isn't Cliff, and that's true. Like, I don't mean to be like rude to Jason. Jason is a very good bassist, but he is not Cliff Burton. He did not change the face of music. He did not show up and be like, you know what, I'm gonna just do stuff no one's ever heard before. He did like good stuff, don't get me wrong, but again, he just isn't Cliff. And unfortunately, all the guys in the band were, specifically James and Lars. Kirk never really seemed to have much beef with anyone, but he also didn't seem to have that much creative control in the band, so like, he didn't have room to have much beef. But regardless of that, you have this situation where Lars and James and Kirk, being fair, were all best friends with you know, or at least super close friends with Cliff, and then you got this new guy Jason, who isn't Cliff. He's not as good as Cliff. He's not as able as Cliff. So they haze him, and near endlessly they haze this kid. And you know, it's a shame, because he was good at what he did, and he was happy and eager to be in the band. And so this album comes out, and he's barely audible on it, and they haze him on stage all the time, and they haze him behind the scenes, and yada yada. So then they come out with their next album. This was worked on, produced by Bob Rock is his name, and I'm not kidding. And it is the Black Album, which is, as people would describe, their sellout album. I would not call it that. It's the album they made, like, by far the most money. Oh boy, that album sold. You know, it had Enter Sandman on it, so of course it sold. That's one of the most commercially successful songs of all time. Or, well, maybe not anymore. Times have been a-changin', I'll admit. But, boy, that song had legs, brother. So, you know, that whole album was produced by a producer who knew what he was doing, and Newsted had a say in it, but it was mostly, as always, it was mostly James. And that album, I like, a lot of people like, but it was a major shift in the tonality for the band, because they were moving from their more thrash metal-y roots, heck yeah, Frozen, to a more modern kind of dissonant sound. It was kind of, you know, it kind of emulated Nirvana in the way that, like, Nirvana was grunge, right? Like, they were like kind of like the progenitor of that, whereas it was definitely Metallica. It's definitely metal. There's no mistaking that, but you can tell that it's softer Metallica. They have Nothing Else Mattress in it, and that's a song that's very, very slow and very not metal in nature. It's very reserved and kind of solemn in a way, and it's a great song. And it had Fade to Black, which is like a very tragic song, especially for Metallica. Most of their songs, well, all right, being fair, they're theming on other songs for Metallica are definitely tragic in different ways, right? But Fade to Black is tragic on a personal level. I think it's the first time they really bridged that gap to be a very personal band, and it's just a great album all around. And you know, everyone had input, but Jason led the charge, and I think, James led the charge, and it led to Jason getting to have a tone. And there was a lot of infighting at this time. Not a lot, but this was the start of a lot of like seeds being planted for infighting later, because, like, boy, let me tell you, this was the start of like everyone like Lars and James starting to not like each other. And then in the intervening years, there was albums. I don't remember when things happened. I believe like this was around Load and Reload that happened around this time. And you know what? Let me find out, because this was 1990 that the Black Album came out. So let me Google Load by Metallica, because 96. Okay, so that means Saint Anger came out first, then, didn't it? Anger by Metallica. Oh, 2003. Okay, I'm very wrong. So, man, let me think then. Black Album. Did they take a no way they took a 6-year break between albums. Garage Inc. maybe? No. Yes. Yes, I think so. Garage Inc. Metallica. Let's find out here. When did that come out? 98. So that was after Load. Before Reload, though, I believe. Because Reload, I think, was around 2000. I don't know. I think I can't think of any album that would have came out. Maybe S&M, but I don't think so. I think it might have been 19. There's no way they took a 6-year break though. Huh. You know what? Give me a moment. I'll be right back with you. I gotta take a quick break, but I'll be right back. All right, he's back. Sorry about that. I really had to run to the bathroom. So I would like to A, make an addendum, and B, brag. So the slight addendum is I was technically wrong about when the Black Album came out. The Black Album came out in 1990, so it was off by a year. But yeah, the next album after that was Load in 96. 97 was Reload. 98 was Garage Inc. Then Saint Anger in 2000. 3, 4? Shoot. I just looked it up. I looked it up while on my bathroom break. I'm sorry. 2003 was Saint Anger. And then 2008 was their next album. So there was a break in between 2001 and 91 and 96. I don't know why. I don't remember. I think they were just touring a lot and kind of riding the coattails of the Black Album because it was so successful. And they were, starting to show cracks in the unity of the band. But the reason I want to brag is because I, off the top of the dome piece, knew everything I told you up until that point, and I was pretty accurate with most of it. Are you kidding? I missed the uppercut and you hit the sing? That stinks. But, so, Load was when they cut their hair. I know that sounds funny, but it's true. For the album Load, all, if not most, got their hair cut and shortened quite a bit, because they'd all had long metal, 80s metal hair up until that point. And then Load, they got a haircut, and I think it was Alice in Chains who they went on a live TV performance after Metallica had unveiled hey, we cut our hair for Load and Reload and whatever, and freaking the performance that Alice in Chains had, on one of their instruments had written across it on tape, friends don't let friends cut their hair. Because it was growing trend to cut your hair down and not have the crazy long hair around the 90s, and a lot of that had to do with grunge and stuff coming about and whatever. But it was weird that they did Load and Reload so close to each other, but it was a weird time for the band, what can I say? So, moving past that, you get to Saint Anger, which is where Sweet Amber comes from. And that album was a very rough one for that band to get through, because they had a lot of fighting going on. And so Metallica does this really interesting thing, and I don't know of any other band that does this, but I think it is one of the coolest things in the world. And if I ever have a band, I really want to do this. I don't know that it's possible, but I really want to, if I can, pursue this as a tenet that I want to, are you kidding me? That I want to uphold for my band as a concept. I just think it's so impossibly cool. So they record a mini documentary or a full-length documentary for every album they produce since the Black Album, and I just think that's impossibly cool, because they record the whole process of every song from the basic ideas kind of coming together as little like thought concepts to the full product coming out, like coming together, and it's all this stuff that's like it's super cool to watch, and you know, you see it happen, and it's like it's such an interesting process that you never really get an insight to. Normally you have like sure a picture of behind the scenes or like a cool interview where they talk about, where a band talks about it later, right? But never is it as in-depth as a full like, hey, we're going to show you the whole music process inside and out right here right now for our band. And Metallica does that, and they have for a while, and they did it for Saint Anger, but they did it for the Black Album, and like I said, you can see cracks starting to form. And when they did it for Saint Anger was such a hard time for the band, because they were like basically on the edge of breaking up, and specifically James and Lars had a lot of beef that they needed to work out. So Saint Anger, going into that album, Jason Newsted left the band. They did like a show. I don't remember where it was or what happened. I remember what happened, but I don't remember where it was. But basically, Jason came out with the band to play, hadn't said a word to anyone in the band that day, like almost at all. He showed up to play, didn't speak to anyone, went out and did his set, and left without a word. And like the next day or something like that, reached out to them, was like, hey, yeah, I'm out of the band. I quit. And like didn't tell anyone. It was just like, I'm done. I am done with you guys. I'm done with this. And it's like, it's an incredible idea for me to think of like how impossibly stressed he must have been to want to leave one of the most successful bands of all time, right? But he didn't, and it was as simple as that. He was like, all right, I'm leaving. And you know, I don't fault him. It's just that's insane to think that they got to that point, right? And then going into Saint Anger, they didn't have a bassist at all yet. They were trying to recruit for one, but just didn't have one yet. And funny enough, in that recruitment drive for a bassist, they ended up Les Claypool actually tried out for that band because he knew Les Claypool of Primus fame knew Kirk Hammett in high school. Like, they were friends. And Kirk like mentioned like, hey man, you should come in and just try out for my band. And he was like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. You know, I don't really like that music. You know, I don't like super listen to it, but I'll give it a shot. And yeah, he went out for we should be okay. Yeah, even if they were all critical hits, we should be fine. Don't have tragic irony. Are you kidding me? You got all 3 crits. That's insane. But so he tried it for the thing, and he was like, I didn't really realize how big of a band they were until I showed up and I was told, don't be nervous for meeting. I was like, nervous? What are you talking about? I'm friends with one of these guys. But yeah, it was this whole thing, and he obviously didn't get the spot because they didn't fit, whatever. And there's several funny interviews where like for VH1, I think it was, James did an interview where he was like, yeah, Les Claypool tried out for the band. He was like too good, so we just, you know, we didn't pick him. And Les Claypool in a different interview was like, yeah, there's an interview where James says that I was too good, quote unquote, for the band. He's like, yeah, no, he knew that I was a weirdo and I didn't think I belonged. Which is just really funny. But so they were going into this album process and they're like, we're going to create an album and we don't have a bassist, so they ended up using Bob Rock again. And he recorded the bass track, interestingly enough, for that album. But you have the extended issue of no bassist, and James and Lars are imploding. Like, they hate each other and have to work out these problems. They're screaming at each other, and like, oh man, it goes and it goes and it goes with these two. And you know, in the course of this album, James is, or leading up to this album, I think, rather, James is like, hey man, I'm gonna go to rehab. I'm an alcoholic. I'm admitting it, and I need to go to rehab. He is like, I was given an ultimatum at home, and he's like, I care more about my wife than I do this band. So for the time being, I'm out of Metallica. Don't talk to me. I'm not in Metallica. because I'm going to rehab. I care more about my family, my wife, and I think at the time he had his kids. I don't know if they were born yet or not. But he's like, that means more to me than this band ever will and ever can. Okay, we're healing. But so basically, like, Metallica had 2 members, and they're like, well, what do we do? And then James, comes out of rehab, and they end up going through this album creation process and everything. And Sweet Amber is a song that, if you listen to it, I'm sure you can guess based on the title now that I've told you James is alcoholic, or if you already knew, sorry, the episode's useless to you in terms of information. But it's about James's addiction with alcohol. And the song, like, if you listen to it, it's not very well hidden. It's not like it's a deep cut metaphor. By the way, see ya, Blaine. But it's the chorus is like, how sweet are you? How sweet does it get? And it's he says something about how he lies to get a smile at the time. And I believe it's about how he was concealing his alcoholism from his... By the way, we're just going to go to the numbered islands here. And our team is kind of set in stone, but it's not like we were going to change it up anyway. But he was lying to his wife at the time about his alcoholism, and he was like, yeah, I'm not drinking, but he obviously was. And he's like, yeah, I have to go to rehab, and... It was a long process, and I really do appreciate that song. It's not the best song, but I appreciate it. And hey, Celio. Oh, rest in peace, Seal, am I right? But he's going on about, this whole album is kind of talking about James's issues with the band, about how, because he's obviously the main lyricist of the band, and he's talking about like how it's all under his control, and it's these problems, and how he's dealing with alcoholism and many other things, right? Like, there's so much that he's going through in this album, and it's all coming to a head, and so is so is Lars. Is going through a lot, and this album actually had no solos on it, which is very rare for Metallica, but a lot of that came from Kirk being kind of a side character on this album and whatever have you. So he was kind of a second rhythm guitarist for the album, and more of a flavor guitarist, if you will. And to that end, the album, I think, is very good, but it's so emotion filled that it's hard to truly say it's one of their best works, because man, there's some songs on there that I'll admit aren't good, but I quite like them. Like, I enjoy the entire album. I enjoy every Metallica album except for one. If you know Metallica, you know it's Lulu. Of course it's Lulu. If you don't know Metallica, just know that they did a high concept album as their second most recent album, as their band is like 40 years old or older, and it's bad. It's artsy. I appreciate the effort, but it sucks. So it's just, that album is rough, and I know that it's taken me a long time to get to that conclusion, but just know that I love that album. I love Metallica, and boy, is that album something. It's really hard to tell you, like, I love that band, but I mean, that's the way it is. It just be that way. That album is really rough for other people, and the mix on it is the mix on it is really something. The mix on it is like the freaking snare drum from Lars is the most twangy thing I've ever heard in my life, and it's a rough album. But I adore it. I think that they're a great band, and I've wasted a lot of your time, I think, talking about this. But, like, again, this is kind of me getting back to my roots of music means a lot to me, and that band means a lot to me. So I'm sorry that I kind of gushed about that for far too long, but here we are. I think I'm going to call it an episode there, and this is going to be the last episode in this block, so I can promise you that next time we start this up, I won't be talking about Metallica. We'll be done with the topic. One episode's enough for me. For now. But thank you for listening. I genuinely do appreciate it, and I hope that you, if not learned something, found something interesting to kind of cling on to as a little, like, oh, that's neat, a little nugget. You know, I hope that this was worth listening to, and it was interesting to hear about this band, and that, you know, this maybe kickstarts you into thinking about looking up other bands' histories, because a lot of bands have a really, like, spotted history. Like, you go into how, excuse me, how, like, I don't know, the lead singer of Lamb of God spent time in a was it Armenian? In a Turkish? I don't remember. He spent time in a foreign jail cell for a long time because he was accused of murder. Or how one of the members of Mayhem committed suicide, and then they used a picture of his suicide as an album cover for their final album. Then one of the members of that band killed killed a different member of that band. And it was a very brutal murder, and the guy's walking free right now. And, you know, you could talk about how, you know, other bands have broken up and reunited and stuff, and like how Fleetwood Mac, like the four members of the band were married to each other, i.e., like, I think it was the singer and the guitarist were married to each other, and then two other people were married to each other, so there was two couples in the band and then the drummer, right? And the drummer wasn't married to anyone. He was like, I'm the only one in that band who was ever happy, because he was like, I didn't have to fight with anyone. I just showed up and played drums, and I had a great time. So, like, there's so many interesting music history things out there. So seriously, look into it if what I've said to you today, or even just now, is any amount interesting to you, even about the bands that you care about the most. If you've never looked up their history, just look into it a little bit. Sometimes it's really fun. But yeah, I've been rambling, so I'm sorry. We'll cut it off. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.